Our guest this week is Mr. Daniel Kelly. Daniel is a former scout for the New York Jets. He's a current writer for NFL Draft Diamonds and Detroit Lions SI, and author of the book Whatever It Takes, which you can get at whateveritttakes.com. Thank you for being on with us, Daniel. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing really well, Andy and AJ. Thank you for having me on your show today.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get right into it with our hometown team, the Detroit Lions. What would you give them overall, for their overall draft? What kind of a grade would you give?
I would say a B+ is where I would put the Lions' grade. I think they did a real nice job, the new regime. I liked, I think it sent a very clear and plain message. Dan Campbell, of course, comes from the Bill Parcells tree, who hired me back with the New York Jets. The message is clear. He's going to go trenches, offensive, defensive line. Early on, that's where the game is won or lost. And also the message is clear that he has more emphasis on defense than offense. So I think that shows us the Detroit Lions philosophy going forward. And they got some real gems, especially towards the latter rounds. Some guys are going to make a huge contribution and really surprise some people, I think.
Now, I was reading one of your articles. You were actually higher on Rashawn Slater than you were Penei Sewell. Why is that? What do you see?
Absolutely. I mean, when I looked at when I wrote my articles for SIL Lions, when I saw Rashawn Slater, I got really excited out of Northwestern. He reminded me a lot of an old offensive lineman I watched growing up, and I'm dating myself back in with the Redskins days in the last Super Bowl from 1991. But he reminded me a lot of a old school offensive tackle, left tackle named Jim Lachey, a guy who allowed one sack the entire 1991 season. Slater's a technician. He's a guy that he's a guy that handled Chase Young when they played against Ohio State. He's a guy that slides out effortlessly. What I look for, guys, when I look at left tackles, as I look at the handwork and I look at the footwork, those are the two, of the most important factors when you're protecting a quarterback's blind side. Slater is a technician who excels at both. He excels also at pass pro as equal as he excels at run blocking. He's also a finisher at times, so he'll pancake people and put them on the ground. So I really like Slater. I was a big advocate for him. And it's funny because in my articles, the feedback I got from Lions fans, whenever I talked about bringing in Slater, because everybody was receiver. That's all I heard. Even Mel Kiper was receiver. And I said, well, no, I think this regime's going to build through the trenches. I mean, that's just Dan Campbell dating back to Bill Parcells. I think it's going to be a left tackle. And I think that they're going to go with a guy they can build around. And so when I said, bring in Slater and play him at left tackle, everyone's like, hey, wait a second. Hey, Taylor Decker, you can't do that. He just signed him. He had a good season last year. And then when they draft Sewell, they're like, Taylor who? It just shows kind of like the social media is like waves. Sometimes they go all over the place. But when I looked at Sewell, I saw a guy who reminded me a lot in temperament of a guy we had at the Jets, Kevin Mawai. He's a big body guy. He's athletic. But the more I watched the film of Sewell, I noticed that as soon as he became engaged and it was in full contact with a defensive lineman, he stopped moving his feet. And he didn't continue to slide. I believe that's going to be a significant problem if they put him on the left side, especially against the premier pass rushers in the National Football League, because those guys can give a nice head fake and a nice move to the back door. They can spin, come back hard to the inside. I think that's going to be a problem. I also looked at Sewell's hand placement. A lot of times you want the hand placement, you want it inside by the numbers. You want the guy to be able to control the block. Well, Sewell's hands are more on the outside the arms, outside the shoulder pads. He doesn't have the right leverage in those situations. Now, nobody is going to bull rush Penei Sewell. I can promise you that. So it's not as big a deal as it is with some people. He's got a nice anchor. But the thing I look at when I look at Sewell is you're looking at a guy, when they brought in Big V, right? The offensive guard from Philadelphia, offensive tackle. Yeah. I did Big V back in 2019. And I told anybody who would listen, I gave him a C grade, which is an average grade in Philadelphia. He was a backup. He's a guy that could not. He just got exposed in space at right tackle, and so I said, this guy is going to be a guard. Well, the Lions go out and they break the bank and they bring him in at right tackle. Then they find out a few weeks later he's a guard. So to me, Penei Sewell is kind of like a big V junior, because he's a guy also, if you look, guys, at his lower legs, he's got those big lower legs. He's got those big, thick calves, those big, thick ankles. And there's nothing wrong with that for an offensive lineman. But a lot of times there's something wrong with it because they get a little bit heavy-footed. And when you're at left tackle, you've got to be able to adjust quickly. You have to be extremely athletic, and you have to continue moving your feet. I think the handwork and the footwork with Penei Sewell is going to get him exposed. I think he's going to struggle. I projected him as a left guard in the draft. I think he's somebody just like Big V. You can slide inside. If he's a guard, I think he's potentially a Hall of Fame guy. So I don't disagree with people's take on who Penei Sewell is. I just think the handwork and the footwork's going to get him exposed, and I like Slater a lot better at left tackle.
Absolutely. Daniel, can you tell me a little bit about your QB3 pick, Kyle Trask, and what makes him so interesting to you?
The intangibles. The guy is loaded with intangibles. It's funny because a lot of times scouts will miss on a guy like this because everyone gets so caught up in what they can see. And a guy like Kyle Trask required a lot more film study for me. I watched every single throw and run he made in 2020, and a lot of times, I found myself in excuse me, in like an inner conflict when I watched Kyle Trask, because a lot of times it wasn't pretty, but he got the job done. So I kept watching him, and I was like, oh wow! Some throws are like, oh no, what is he doing? And then but he comes back and he rebounds and he makes a lot of beautiful touch passes. He's a guy that I feel is a winner. He's a guy that keeps the team moving forward. And he's a guy that just kind of grew on me the more and more I watched him. And again, guys, I look at the intangibles. I look at the invisible qualities. He reminds me kind of a cross between a Tim Tebow and a Brett Favre. And I'm not at all suggesting he has the arm strength of Brett Favre, because clearly he doesn't. But just in terms of being kind of unorthodox, sometimes you'll see him throwing off his back foot, falling away. But he's a gunslinger. He's a guy that wants it. He's a guy and he throws some beautiful touch passes when he doesn't try to aim it or steer it or gun it in there, and he can just kind of lay it out in front of the receiver, the tight end, or the running back on screens. I felt, especially in the intermediate and deep levels, I felt like he threw some beautiful touch passes, and I came under some heavy fire for the Kyle Trask. Even the USA Today picked up the story, and then the guy got personal with me at the end, and he said, "Hey, listen, Trevor Lawrence is better, But to me, it was so cool to see that Bruce Arians agreed with me, and they brought him in, and all of a sudden Kyle Trask is sitting in perhaps the best situation of any rookie quarterback right now, sitting behind Tom Brady, learning on the defending Super Bowl champions.
Exactly that, and that's what for people that don't know, he got drafted by the Buccaneers, and I am a big fan of any quarterback being drafted sitting behind a veteran QB, and whether that be Cam Newton or Brady or Aaron Rodgers or anybody, and just learn.
Absolutely.
Even if it is only for like a year, like Patrick Mahomes, I think that's what makes him so great. And I feel like, you're a huge Redskins fan or Washington football team fan. Sorry.
Yeah, you see the cup. You see the cup even. I give myself away. Well, if that's not enough, you see the tattoo on my hand, but that's a different show.
Well, we'll get into the Washington football team in a little bit. But no, Dwayne Haskins, I think he didn't have that. He didn't really get to sit behind a guy, and I kind of feel bad for these guys who are their QB1. They come in and they're the guy. They're the show. They're the starting QB. Like it's a completely different ball game, when you're in the NFL. The league is a whole lot different from any division in college football. So, anyways, my next question was, in your April 24th article on Draft Diamonds, I think you made a brilliant comparison or connection between Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence. This is a guy I really wanted to talk to you about because to me, I think you and I are on the same plane. I don't feel like Trevor Lawrence he's not as driven as I would like him to be. Like, if he's going to be my franchise QB or my number one overall pick, I want a guy to be eating, drinking, sleeping football, and he just is very cavalier and kind of, go take it or leave it. If he gets knocked out in career-ending injury after game one, it seems like he could care less. Give me your take on Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. This is a guy I've come under heavy fire for because everybody thought he was a generational player from the time he picked up a football. And when I went back and watched him on film, there's a lot of things. I mean, I'm not just killing the guy. There's a lot of things that you like. I mean, he's got the big, the tall frame, the lanky frame. He's a guy that can see the field because of that, because of his height. He's a guy that, of course, played primarily, as you know, at Clemson out of the shotgun, which is a little bit concerning, especially at that height. I want to see how he is under center because that's a reality. Quarterbacks do play under center as well in the National Football League in certain systems. But those weren't the biggest concerns. I did like the fact that he looked very polished. He looked like someone like Tiger Woods. That, somebody's been working with him since he was about 3 years old on how to drop back in the pocket, and he looked real smooth doing those things. He had a very adequate play action fake, I felt. He used it almost on every single play, which is more and more of a growing trend in college football itself. There's a thought process there that it's going to hold the safeties and freeze the safeties momentarily in the corners. They give the linebackers also too, to give the receivers and the tight ends a momentary, a little bit of a route advantage, if you will. So there's certain things that he does well in the pocket. And he really looks the part, until he starts throwing. Now, also, he's got a cannon for an arm. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the guy can sling the football, all the way down the field. And so he's big, tall, big, strong arm. I mean, what's not to like, right? Well, the problem is as I think that he, what was really exposed to me, it was the fact that he only would throw the ball and unload the ball a lot of times when the receivers were either wide open or where they were coming open. You cannot do that in the National Football League. You have to throw, timing routes, and that's something where I did not see much of any of that out of Trevor Lawrence, and that's how quarterbacks make a living in the National Football League. You have to throw the ball, in other words, before the receiver breaks. He's throwing the ball after he breaks or after he's already broken out, onto the route. That's going to be a problem, especially against NFL corners. He's also somebody that I felt, threw an accurate deep ball only about half the time. The rest of the time, they, well-placed ball. The rest of the time, they were kind of 50-50 jump balls. I mean, like I said in the article, if you're going to throw old school, Al Davis football and just go deep in every play and have a bunch of guys that run a 4.2 40 and have them just throw it deep and hope Randy Moss is down there to chop up and catch it. Hey, absolutely, Trevor Lawrence is your guy. But I think there's a lot of things that will be exposed with him. And like to your point too, is the game of football is won or lost from the neck up, and that's a huge concern, especially when a guy is as bold as Trevor Lawrence comes out in a Sports Illustrated article, to your point, and says, to put it plainly and bluntly, as they would in a scouting room, I don't really give a damn, if I win or lose. His father comes out and says, hey, his son doesn't really set on a Super Bowl. He's not really awards driven. His wife now says, yeah, there's more life than a football. His high school coach says, yeah, I can kind of see him walking away from this whole thing. That's extremely concerning to me. I mean, I broke into the league the year before Trent Baalke, the general manager of the Jacksonville Jaguars, did back with the Jets. And if I was Trent right now, I would be extremely concerned, because to me, if I'm the general manager, I don't want a guy under center that can take it or leave it when the season's on the line, when a big game's on the line, when all the chips are up on the table. What's that guy going to do with a minute 13 left and no timeouts? I mean, that's the concern. And then to your point too, also about Andrew Luck, I mean, this is a guy that, basically after he makes his 30, 40, 50, 100 million, whatever it is, he could take his ball and go home.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was just going to ask you. I just thought that was a brilliant comparison between him and Andrew Luck.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Daniel, before we get into the second half and talk about your book, I got one more thing I want to challenge you on this. I'm not really qualified to, but I'm going to. Justin Fields is your QB number one, and I was shocked to hear that, because Ohio State has a long history of producing quarterbacks that, for whatever reason, they don't seem to translate to the league. Going all the way back to like Terrell Pryor. I mean, it just, for whatever reason, they just don't do well in the league. What sets Justin Fields apart in your mind from the rest of the Ohio State quarterbacks that come out?
Well, that's a great question and a very valid question, because, I mean, especially when you look at a Dwayne Haskins who's been brought up on the show, I mean, Haskins was a guy that, to me, I mean, he had the big arm and the frame and all those type of things. But when he was great until he opened his mouth. He exposed a lot of arrogance. He exposed, he was really the most immature quarterback I've seen in 40 years of watching the game. So that was a problem. But I'm not seeing that on Justin Fields. I'm seeing a guy that's a dual threat, a legit dual threat. He's got the arm, he's got the NFL arm strength. He's a guy that looks, to me, in the pocket, he looks good in the eyes. What I mean by that, he looks very confident. He's very smooth in the pocket. He's very smooth with his mechanics. He's got a great play action. It actually fools somebody. It's not just going through the motions like the other three, Trey Lance and Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence do. They just kind of put the ball out. Everybody can see this quarterback still has it. I mean, Justin Fields. I mean, the idea of a play action is actually, if like going back to the days of Boomer Esiason, it actually fools you. That you wonder who has the ball. Does a running back have it or does a quarterback have it? That's what draws the safeties up. But it creates the gap in coverage in the deep part of the field. But I mean, Fields actually, the cameraman, he fooled the cameraman a few times. And in the ball, you can see the camera moving. And who has the ball? Is it the running back? Is it Fields? Who is it? And so he's a guy that can, when he rolls out to the right, rolls out to the left, he's real smooth. He can take off. He can run. He can step up in the pocket and throw or run, which I think creates a real headache for NFL defenses, because they're going to have to keep somebody in. Just like any dual threat quarterback in the past, it's a more of a challenge to an NFL defense. I think he's a smart guy. People knocked him and said, oh, he's a one-read quarterback, one-trick pony. That's not what I saw in film when I watched every single one of his throws during the season. He's a guy I could see his head scanning, looking. He's looking through his progressions. Now, yes, does he lock in occasionally? Sure he does. Every quarterback in college occasionally locks in. But it's something they have to be weaned off even more so. But he's just a guy that has that feel to him that he's going to do very well. Now, would I placed him with the Chicago Bears? No, I wouldn't have. But I think that looking forward, I think he's a guy that could potentially very well be the best quarterback in Bears history. And I know that's a mouthful, but when you look at the names, it's really not, especially in modern history. Jim McMahon's about the last great one. You got a valid point. When you look at Andy, when you look at the Ohio State quarterbacks, there's not a lot of success there. But then I marvel, of course, because, fans say, hey, look at Zach Wilson. Look at Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson ranks 9th at all-time at BYU as well on a very, very lackluster list of names that we've never even heard of. I mean, like John Beck and all these guys. Right. So it's interesting. And I'm not saying you personally, but I'm saying, just in general, how fans on social media are. They're like, oh yeah, Fields, Ohio State quarterback, forget about him. He's trash. But then they'll say a guy like Zach Wilson is like a generational, once in a lifetime player. But he ranks 9th on his school's list of all time in passing yardage, and a bunch of behind the names that nobody's ever heard of outside of like Ty Detmer, Steve Young, and Jim McMahon. So I think he's a guy that's going to do exceptionally well, and I look for him to lead the Bears to the playoffs. I look for Dalton to give way to him very early on, and I think he's a guy that's going to create some excitement. And I think he's a guy that's the most prepared to go into a team that didn't do too well last year, like all the top teams who drafted did, because wherever there's an offensive line deficiency per se, he can make up for that with his athleticism.
Fair enough. All right, so I want to talk to you now about your book. We'll kind of go into that a little bit. Your book, Whatever It Takes, is an autobiography that chronicles your life and how you got your start in the league with the New York Jets. So one of my first questions is, you grew up a super fan, by all accounts, of the Washington Redskins. At what point did you go from super fan? Did it click that, okay, now like I want to go the route of being an NFL scout? Like where does it go from just watching a ton of football to, all right, I'm going to turn this into an actual career?
Well, it kind of picked me. And what I mean by that is, I'm a guy that grew up in a small town in Minnesota, and I had that, like you mentioned, that fanaticism. I mean, 9 years old, I threw up and missed 3 days of school when the Redskins lost to the Raiders. That's all how fanatic I was about it. So I wasn't somebody just taking it casually. I mean, I was heartbroken. But so the passion grew as I did throughout my teenage years. I was about 5'10", 130 pounds, soaking wet, and I was afraid of confrontation. So that didn't work out at safety for me. I was the only kid on my team not to earn a letter jacket. So I mean, that's kind of like, if I can do it, anybody can do it type of thing. My claim to fame in high school was dropping an interception. So, I mean, that's when we were down like 40-0 at the end of the game. But, and I gave coaching, a thought and consideration. I actually even designed a play for Joe Gibbs, being a Redskins fan when I was 17. I sent it to him. He used it work for a touchdown in a preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's the letter from Coach Gibbs is in my book, thanking me for the play suggestion. If anybody's wondering, did he really do that? He did. But but really everything changed for me when my parents gave me a book for my 17th birthday called Tony Rosano was the author, and the name of the book was Secrets of NFL Scout. I mean, this was amazing. This was the scouting director of the 49ers under the Bill Walsh heyday back with the 49ers in the 1980s. This is a guy that was, who convinced Walsh to draft a guy named Joe Montana instead of Steve Dills. Everyone gives Walsh the credit. It's actually Rosano. But it's something where it was love at first sight. I said, this is what I want to be. Just like it was when I became a Redskins fan at 8 years old. At 17, I said, this is what I want to be. I read the book. And there was nothing about scouting. I mean, this is before the internet even. I mean, there was nothing out there. So Rosano's book kind of taught me the ropes. I started taping and recording games. To your point, Andy, did I, when did it click, and when did it change over from me being a fan to being a scout? It never really did, and that was part of the problem. Yeah. So especially when I was at the Jets, and I was a part of the biggest Redskins fan club on Long Island, New York, and so I was kind of like a Jet scout, and I was still a fanatical Redskins scout. And actually, it was so funny because I ended up going down to a playoff game with the Redskins when the fan club picked me up after work one day. We drove down to Washington to the Redskins-Lions wild card playoff game in 1999. Got great tickets. I'm thinking people are like, be careful, they might see you on TV or something. I'm like, there's 80,000 fans at FedEx. No one's going to see me. I mean, I had war paint on. I had a big, Redskins Brian Mitchell jersey, big foam hand, a Redskins hat, glasses, wristbands. I mean, I look like a guy you'd see on a commercial or something. And I'm sitting there, I'm cheering everything, kind of lower deck, corner end zone. And, I'm like, oh, this is great, having fun. And all of a sudden, like 6 months later, Brian Gaine, who of course went on to become the GM of the Houston Texans and now up in Buffalo, he was one of our pro scouts at the time, and he always gave me a hard time. A big Maine kid, Irish guy, and he would always like give me a hard time and come up to me and stuff. And so I'm sitting there one day doing my work in the Jets pro room, and all the young guys are sitting there. We're all doing our work and everything. There's no windows, no clock in the room. You lose all track of time. He walks in. He goes in his classic accent. He goes, well, Kelly. I said, what's up, Brian? He goes, guess what? He goes, I went down to Washington to see a scrimmage against the Baltimore Ravens. I said, oh, how was that, Brian? He goes, well, he said, there was a thunderstorm that came through, a severe thunderstorm, so they had to clear the field. He said, I looked up at the Jumbotron, and what to my eyes did appear but Dan Kelly and all his Redskins gear. I'm like, whoa. I said, what are you talking about, Brian? And he said, he goes, yeah, NFL Films, they got a real close-up of you. And within like 2 weeks, the entire building knew about it. I watched in the 1999 Redskins highlight. Right now, you know how they splice different parts of the highlight film. They show me right after Stephen Davis, the running back, scores a touchdown against the New York Giants. They show like a close-up of me, like real slow with my number one hand, like keeping time to the music. So I got called into the office, called onto the carpet. Everybody had fun with it. Even Mike Tannenbaum, who was my boss at the time, he called me in. He said, just shut the door type of meeting. And he said, you have got to stop being a fan of the Washington Redskins. But it was so it was in my blood, literally. I mean, how much so? I mean, it's quite possible the day I was conceived, the Redskins playing the first Super Bowl January 14th, 1973. It was my mother's birthday. I was born October 11th, 1973. I mean, the math works out almost perfectly. You know, I mean, so I mean, it was really hard for me, but not when I was actually in the building. It wasn't hard because I always did my assignments. But man, I tell you, those guys gave me a lot of grief. I mean, when we go to the NFL scouting combine, Indianapolis, you know, all the guys and scouts be like, hey, make sure we get Kelly's notes over there before he faxes them down to Daniel Snyder. I mean, people were all over me. And of course, one of my job duties was helping the players go from the hotel back to the hospital for their medical testing. So the year LeVar Arrington came out, right? So my assignment was to be back there helping all these players when they came in from the airport, these college players. And LeVar Arrington came back, and I told all the young guys I would get his autograph and all that. They're like, oh, watch out for Kelly. He's going to be all over Arrington, you know? And so, of course, LeVar Arrington walked in, and I said hello to him. And at first, I think he was a little startled. I think he could see the fan in me come out. And I was like, well, I'm supposed to show you to your room and get you back to the hospital, sir, for your medical testing. And he says, he goes, can you carry my bag? And I said, sure, I can try. And he laughed, he smiled. I tried to pick up his bag. I couldn't lift it with two hands. It was so heavy. And he goes, I said, who do you got in there? Troy Aikman, the practice sacking. He's like, yeah, absolutely. so, and of course, then I like, you know, did like a sloppy cursive, like an autograph on the back of my business card that I did personally of LeVar Arrington. And I showed all the young guys just to kind of get back at him. I'm like, look, I got Arrington's autograph. They're like, oh, Kelly, no, you didn't do it. but you know, so the fan never did really work out of me. And that's kind of my story, is I'm not an agent or a player or a coach. I'm a fan. I'm a fan just like any fan watching and listening to this show. I mean, my book is a true story of a fan making the NFL. So while that was kind of unwelcome at times in the National Football League, that's who I am.
So how did you get to the Jets? Like, how did you get your foot in the door there?
It was very carefully. it was quite the experience. I mean, what had happened was I had interned with Tony Dungy in the Minnesota Vikings, 6 months unpaid internship when I was 21. I went through, and this is really something I want our listeners to grab a hold of, is I'm not somebody that knew somebody or you know, Vince Lombardi's not my uncle. You know, it's you know, so when I, you know, after Dungy left for Tampa Bay, I went back into the real world, and you know, I started, I sold Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door. I mean, I went through a really rough time. I went through a major breakup. I lost everything. I got evicted from my apartment. My vehicle got repossessed. I spent a couple days in jail even for having unpaid speeding tickets. Nothing major, but I went through a really rough time. I was going to a different bar every night of the week, quarter beer night. And so this was leading up from about 21 to 23 years old. So I just want somebody to know out there, if you have a dream and you think, well, maybe I've done too much or I can't do that or this, that, you can. Nothing's impossible. The word impossible is just something, is a limitation we place on ourselves. And when I was 24, I found myself working at Bank America Mortgage as a loan officer, and I was sitting in a real estate meeting one day, and I just started mentally drifting out the window. It was so personal. I mean, nothing wrong with real estate, but it was really boring to me. And I was like, you know, what am I doing here? You know, my dream is to be an NFL scout. Well, you know, it's better to go for it and not get it than always wonder what could have been. So I started, like, you know, I had a little satellite dish. I called DirecTV, subscribed to the college football package. I had all, you know, I bought all these pens and paper and all this stuff at Target. I started recording games. And so what happened, guys, is over a 7-month period of time, I worked full time at the bank as a loan officer, and then I moonlighted at night as a scout. I was probably getting about 15, 20 hours sleep a week. You know, I was drinking coffee, no-dos, I was taking Jolt, you know, anything I could to keep myself awake. And so these piles of reports kind of built up, and it turned into be a 350-page self-published NFL 1998 draft guide, which really served as my resume. And I spent every dime I had, including my next month's rent, on getting this thing published. And I sent it out 3 copies to every team in the NFL, and I personalized each book to the general manager, the head coach, and director of player personnel. I spent another $1,300 on overnight mail, on a credit account, and I sent these out northeast, south, and west. And I sat back and waited to see what the response would be. I mean, and of course, I personalized each box as well to, you know, like, attention, you know, Coach Bill Parcells. You know, so I mean, when these boxes arrived at these different team facilities, they looked important. They didn't get caught up in the fan mail or something that looked like, oh, geez, this is like a 10-pound box. I better Snyder get this up to Coach Parcells right away, and it says attention confidential, Coach Bill Parcells. And so all of a sudden, right when I released the book, the New Orleans Saints called. I was told that Mike Ditka, who was the head coach at the time, really liked the book. I received like a stack of rejection letters I still have from the who's who of the NFL, all the head coaches, GMs. I mean, everybody sent back letters say, thanks, but no thanks. We'll keep your information on file. I'm still waiting for them to look it up. But then the call came from the Jets, and I was told that Bill really liked the book, being Bill Parcells, and by Scott Pioli, who's his son-in-law. And he said, hey, we got a low-paying position in the pro scouting department. Is that something you'd be interested? I'm like, absolutely. It's like a game show. I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
Next thing, absolutely. Next thing I knew, they flew me out for a marathon 2-day interview, and then they extended the offer to me to become the newest member of the New York Jets, which was a dream come true.
That's awesome. Dan,
go ahead.
Oh, Daniel, I had a couple quick rapid fire questions for you. You're super interesting.
Hey, we just talked about a game show.
Yes, I know. Right.
We're getting good. I got a little coffee in me now, so now I'm starting. The wheels are starting to turn.
Just a little coffee.
Just a little. Yeah, my kids. Between my wife Samantha and I, we got 9 children, and they're all the time. They say, don't do it, Daddy. Don't. If I have like a Bang or an energy drink or a Red Bull or something, like, don't do it. Don't do it. I'm like, yeah, it tastes good. I like this birthday cake Bang. They're like, oh no. And of course, I drink those right before bedtime, right? So, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, what's next for guys who went undrafted right now?
An opportunity if they got drafted. I mean, that's the beauty of the NFL. It doesn't really matter if you're taking the first round, if you're undrafted. If you have an opportunity and you have a chance, they're gonna be able to try to make a team. And depending on what the situation is, what the fit is, what the system is, those guys that got the call and got signed to a team, they're going to have a chance to make the team, probably make special teams right off the bat. We've seen a number of undrafted guys I just wrote about the other day, Tony Romo, Kurt Warner, all these guys that went undrafted. So I mean, there's a real good chance that not a lot of them, but some of them. I mean, there's even a show on TV, the Undrafted show with the NFL Network. There's a chance that, some of them are going to make it. Because a lot of times I like the guys who are undrafted because they're the hungriest. Yeah. And a lot of times those guys will come in, whereas maybe a prima donna in the first round, 53% first rounders historically bust because they have that entitlement issue. They feel that, they're not really opening to learning. Well, the undrafted guys, they're as hungry as can be. And those are guys who are going to come in, they're going to challenge, and some of them are going to make a team.
Yeah. Kurt Warner is one of my favorite all-time players, or favorite
Absolutely.
Players of all time. What do you think the Washington football team should rename their team, if at all? What's your stance on that? I don't want to get you in trouble. Okay.
Put it back.
Hey, put it back. It's interesting. I think the owner, Mr. Snyder, agrees with me because even in their indoor practice facility, I saw on social media, they still have the logo at midfield on their indoor facility. Media is not allowed into, and it still says Redskins in the end zone. So I think that Snyder's a guy that he was adamantly opposed to changing the name. He always said he would never do it. He got pressed and pressured. The right recipe, the right climate, everything came about. They pressure the sponsors, the other owners, the minority owners on the team. So I think, him naming the team Washington Football Team was his kind of subtle way of saying, it's kind of like the golden rule. And somebody once said to me at the bank, they said, you know what that is? I said, well, yeah, I do on the others. No, he goes, no. It's whoever has the most gold makes the rules. I'm like, okay. So I think that he probably will keep the Washington Football Team name as it is. I know a lot of people think they should be called something else, but I think that in the end, he's either going to keep it the Washington Football Team or he's going to go back to the Redskins once everything kind of blows over and smooths over.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. My last question, then I'll turn it over to Wataki. Your goal is to become an NFL GM. Is there a dumpster?
Yes, sir.
Is there a dumpster fire in the league where you wouldn't take that job?
I would take any job. I'd take any job. I mean, in 2017, the Browns went winless, and I wrote a personalized letter to Jimmy Haslam, the owner of the team, and I in the letter I told him that I could put together a Hall of Fame staff within 3 weeks of given the opportunity. And in my opening press conference, when the Browns were winless, I was prepared to walk up to the podium. In my proposal, my opening lines were, when I accepted the position, was Cleveland Browns Super Bowl 53 champions. I mean, I was going to go from winless to taking the whole thing that season if he would have given me the job. So I don't think there's not a job. I mean, I can walk into any NFL team and win the Super Bowl. Not only win the Super Bowl, but turn them into the most dominant dynasty in the history of the National Football League. I made a 166-page proposal for Mr. Haslam that is full of revolutionary ideas, different wins in a league of copycats and cookie cutters, and a lot of times in the NFL, different wins. If you look back historically at the teams like a Bill Walsh, or you look at a Buddy Ryan, or you look at the Wildcat more recently with the Soprano and with Bill Parcells, when you have different type of systems, it takes time for the NFL and NFL defenses to adjust to them. I have an offense that nobody's ever seen before in the NFL. I have a head coach that has won 12 state championships in high school, Kevin Kelly, who's going to revolutionize the National Football League. I have a defense that the NFL has never seen before. These type of things, along with the type of staff and personnel I'm going to put in place, and the type of plan of action that I have, and the type of players I'm going to bring in, and the type of moves I'm going to make, I can take any team in the NFL, again, and turn them into champions and into a dynasty. And that's something that I believe that Bill Parcells saw in me as a young man. That's taken me years to kind of understand, because that's what Parcells always did. He always went into the worst situations, turned them around, and did much better with them. And so I'm excited. If I had 10 minutes inside of a room with an NFL owner, I believe with all my heart, I could convince that owner to hire me as a general manager.
Well, I'm going to hold you to this, what we were talking about it, Dan. For our listeners, this isn't, I don't know if it's mutually exclusive or not, but it's a contest. If you can get Daniel, an interview with an owner,
My dad was Dan. It's okay.
and it can result in a job as a general manager, he will make you his personal assistant GM.
Correct. I mean, the thing of it is the way I've always done things in life is outside the box. I mean, even how I got into the NFL. I mean, it was crazy because I barely passed through high school, and I failed out of a small community college, and I ended up getting hired by the Jets. And I remember sitting at the desk for lunch. I had to answer the phones for Scott Pioli and Mike Tannenbaum when the secretary was at lunch. And I would see stacks of resumes on the desk from guys from Ivy League schools. And I was a guy that had no formal background, really. And I didn't do well in school because I was so interested in football. So I've always done things a little bit outside the box, much different than everybody else. So I believe strongly my scouting mentor, Lionel Vitale, who's the college scouting director with the Dallas Cowboys right now, he taught me over the last 20 years about this concept of 6 degrees of separation, that we're all only 6 people away from anybody in the world. I mean, like right now, like we talked about Andy the other night online, you're 2 people away, and so are you from Jerry Jones, because I know Lionel Vitale with the Cowboys. He has dinner once a week with Jerry Jones. Everybody knows somebody who knows these people. So the offer stands. If you're out there and you're listening, and you know an NFL owner, and you can get me in front of that person, and I get the job, and you're the reason for it, yes, you're going to go from where you're at right now to being an assistant general manager in the National Football League with me and my staff.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, we've kept you for longer than we said we would. I appreciate your time and talking to us. And his book is Whatever It Takes. You can get it at whateverittakes.com. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Wherever books are sold online, you're very welcome, guys. Thank you very much. It didn't seem like that long. It's kind of like watching film. It just went by like that. It was so fun.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Continued success.
Thank you.
Take care.
You as well.
You're welcome.